Well, welcome everyone. It is so nice to see you today. I know this is December, which is a busy month. And I also want to thank everyone for their patience who were planning on last week. This time of year is tough for people. And thanks for your patience around. Sometimes we do have some last minute cancellations. We didn't want to, but we did not have our speaker that day. So it's good to see everybody here today. I see some familiar faces. Welcome back. And I see some new names. Welcome to you. I will quickly go over what we go over in the beginning. So thanks for your patience, those of you that have been on before. But we are called Minnesota Project Scope, what that stands for, because we always have to have an acronym, right? For those of you that work in special education, you know, we love acronyms. And in this case, Project Scope stands for Supporting Children of the Opioid Epidemic, which if any of you are listening to the news, post-COVID, the numbers are as high as they've ever been in terms of opioid deaths, opioid use. Unfortunately, our need continues in this arena that we need to continue. I'm sure many of you have worked with families for which addiction and perhaps opioids have been a part of their lives. So some terms we will use, we're focusing on formerly an older term is neonatal abstinence syndrome. That's more broad around any child that is experiencing abstinence from a substance. More specific to opioids, we say neonatal opioid withdrawal syndrome, or NOWS. That does not roll off the tongue as easily. So I try my best to use the more modern term, but sometimes I default to the older term because it's easier to say. I'm going to work on that. That's my challenge. We are a community of early intervention providers supporting children and families, and we use the ECHO model, which stands for Education and Community Health Outcomes, or extension. Next slide, please. We're really we're really kind of at the end of the day today, end of the month or middle of the month, I guess, and we are trying to do our best. It stands for Extension for Community Health Outcomes. But we also have education at the center of it. We promote health equity. We share our knowledge and expertise, and our goal is to increase access. We want to provide healthcare and really bridge healthcare and education. We have a lot of resources at the University of Minnesota. We have a lot of connections to healthcare. And most of you, not everyone, but most of you are in education. So we really want to have this bridge between healthcare and education and create this community of practice. We want to share the knowledge and experience we have here at the University of Minnesota. And we also want to learn from the knowledge and experience you have out in the field. So we consider this bi-directional. Everyone teaches, everyone learns. We learn from you as well. All right, next slide. And just to sort of highlight the ECHO model again, we use technology. We're on Zoom. I know, newsflash, it's 2022. We're almost at the end of the year. All of us use Zoom, but prior to that, this was pretty innovative, and we still are, of course, but using Zoom, this actually was done with some satellite sites, and before Zoom was widely used, the ECHO team was doing this model as well. We utilize best practices to reduce disparity. We always have a family story or case study. That's been a common practice in medicine for a long time, that they present on a topic and then they bring what they call, a case study, and they talk about it, and all the physicians talk about it together. We like the term family story to apply our learning, and we use data to monitor outcomes. And please, 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 I beg you, Drake begs you, please fill out your evaluation. It helps us collect the data that we need, and it also is helpful for us connecting you with a certificate that you can use for your re-licensure.
And I guess before we move on, I'll just add on there. Has anyone not gotten an email from myself or Chime Lee regarding surveys? I believe we've grabbed everyone, but does anyone?
Do you want people to use the reactions, raise their hand if they haven't
I would say throw it in chat. Just
okay.
Put in chat, hey, I'm missing that, and then we can reach out to you. But we try to make sure we grab everyone at least once. And how it works is, Once you fill out the initial survey, then you'll be on Shimei Lee's list, who is our evaluation specialist here for Project Scope. You won't normally see her on the calls, but she's behind the scenes making sure we get all that info. And so you just want to make sure that once you fill out that initial survey, then you'll be on her list to get weekly surveys. So
Great.
Yeah.
Great. That's great. Great. Can we ask one more housekeeping piece? So we have a session next Thursday, correct? On the 15th.
Yeah.
Okay. And we are trying to find a time to make up potentially another time. And it's not easy in December. I don't know, Drake, would you want people to do a show of hands about a date we're considering, or would you
Sure.
rather
Yeah, if
wait
people
on
would be
that?
around, because we want to make sure we have an audience
Right.
if it's a new date. Yeah, that would make sense.
So we have one more question before we move on to the topic. And you can show us in the reactions. And if you look at the bottom of your screen, you can click on the reactions, which looks like a little happy face. And you can just either raise your hand or do a thumbs up, maybe a thumbs up. We are pondering, there's not a lot of space left in December for us to fit one in. And we're pondering the Thursday. So we're having it next Thursday, the 15th, and we are looking at possibly, okay, December 22nd. That was the time we could possibly fit it in. And I know many of you may be on break. How many of you would be able to attend that? It's not required, of course, with a thumbs up if you would be here on Thursday, December 22nd. Thumbs. I know many of you may be already on winter break. Okay, I'm seeing a few thumbs up, Drake. Drake's going to just sort of look at the thumbs up of how many people. I'm thinking a lot of you are off at that point. I know it's not optimal at all. We thought we'd have this all nicely wrapped up and tied with a bow on the 15th, but we may need to think about that, Drake. Yeah. You were able to capture. It does not look like we'd have super high attendance.
Yeah, so we'll keep you all posted on what we decide then. So just watch for an email either way. I guess if you don't hear an update, assume there is no new sessions, but if there is one scheduled for the 22nd, we'll obviously let you all know and add a spot in the registration for that. So
yeah, thank you. Yeah. All right. Okay, Drake, moving along. I see Dr. Simasek is here. Mm-hmm. All right. So today we have for our topic, positive supports for children experiencing behavioral challenges, which is a great topic. And we added it on. So congratulations for getting here, because the registration was a little different, right, Drake, to get on this one. Even I had to re-register. So thank you, everyone, for being here. It is a really important topic in this area. For many of you that were on my session where I talked about some of the developmental effects of neonatal abstinence syndrome or neonatal opioid withdrawal syndrome, you likely remember that one of the outcomes that we saw was certainly we saw increases for children who are prenatally exposed of ADHD, executive functioning issues, and behavioral challenges. So we felt that it was very important to talk about some of the positive behavioral supports that you would need, some strategies when in working with children who may have been exposed, who may have some of these behavioral outcomes as a result of this. But it's certainly a topic that is also beneficial to a broader group of children as well, because behavioral supports are always a helpful thing. So I'm really excited for this talk today. Next slide. And again, the session, Drake had the December 22nd as a maybe on there, in case any of you saw that on the list. I saw that at the bottom as pondering it, correct, Drake? I was seeing that is not scheduled yet, correct? All right. Okay, so here's our schedule for the day. I'm just going to keep us moving along because I think we're just a little past the time. Perhaps I'm chatting too much in the beginning, per usual, right, Drake? And I just want to make sure we allow enough time for Dr. Simasek. Next slide. All right, so I wanted to welcome and introduce our speaker today. My colleague, Dr. Jessica Simasek. Her office is actually right across from me. She probably can maybe hear me talking, echoing through the halls. She directs the ICI Teleoutreach Center at the Masonic Institute for the Developing Brain and works at the Institute on Community Integration with myself. Dr. Simasek does a lot of great work around early intervention. I'm going off I have my standard bio here and I will read it, but is doing a lot of good work right now around telehealth interventions and around working with kids that are on waiting lists to get services and supports. So really important work. She's a principal investigator on several research projects related to the use of innovative distance learning technologies to improve access to intervention for children with developmental disabilities or complex communication needs or behavioral needs. She serves as a faculty mentor in the Minnesota LEND program, and maybe Drake can put a link to the LEND program. It stands for Leadership, Education, and Neurodevelopmental Disabilities, and we're always looking for people to join us, people who are out teaching. We meet every Thursday right now, and it's a lot of great learning. But I'll keep going on Dr. Simasek's bio. And her work has appeared widely in many peer-reviewed journals focusing on intervention research. She has a PhD in educational psychology, special education from the University of Minnesota, and is a former Minnesota LEND Fellow. Yay. So she is a gopher through and through. We accept, but both a student, a fellow, and works here. So we are excited to have her today. Welcome, Dr. Simasek. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me for that very nice introduction. It's really nice to get to meet all of you. I think this Echo Scope is really important, and I think it's a really, really cool thing going on in the state. So I'm really happy to be able to be here today and chat with you. I know we have kind of a small group. I know there's a structure to follow, but all questions are welcome. I know we'll get to a period where we can talk through those, but if you've got one in your head and you want to get it in chat, feel free to throw it in there as we make sure we hit it. I will go ahead and share my screen, and then you will also get these slides as well after the talk. Let's see here, I should be good at screen sharing at this point. I'm sure you hear everybody say this, so bear with me for 1 second. Okay, so I know I participated in a previous round of Scope. And sometimes in some of like the sharing out of case examples or family stories, behavioral challenges would come up as an area where families could use some additional support or children could use some additional support. So that I feel like is common, that all children engage in some levels of different kinds of behaviors we may deem challenging. So we'll talk through some of those supports that are maybe a little bit more kind of like ready-made things you could go do today, and then also actual resources that are out there for more, if a child is engaging in behaviors that are really limiting, their ability to participate in things that they'd like to be in are really stressful for themselves or the family. All right, I'm assuming people can see my slides and hear me, and just stop me at any point if that changes. So this is kind of our objectives for the day. We'll talk about that importance on and knowing what I do know about the audience. This is probably just a review for all of you, but having a really supportive environment. Of course, the best intervention is an ounce of prevention, as they say. So having a really supportive environment to try to prevent and intervene early when challenging behavior might occur. We'll talk through proactive strategies that can just kind of, again, encourage positive behavior and kind of discourage engaging in challenging kinds of behaviors. And then we'll dive into talk about a little bit more complex kinds of behavioral needs and how you kind of go through like the functional behavior assessment process, some resources in Minnesota around that might be helpful. And then we'll end with talking some about overcoming barriers to intervention access. As Dr. Hollandi just pointed out, that's an area that I like to focus on a lot in my research. And so I'll share just a little tidbit of that with you. And yes, you can absolutely have a copy of the PowerPoint. Everyone was diligently following up with me to get it. And I like to do some final tweaking. So that's what I was up to. I try to make it as customized as I can, but I will certainly share these. I'll also share a website really quick, and then I'll get back to being focused here. That doesn't have this specific, this is unique to all of you. But this is a website where we do share a lot of behavioral training resources that we've done for other kinds of trainings. And so there's a lot of things on things like positive behavior support on that website as well. It's run in partnership with the Institute on Community Integration and the Department of Human Services. All right, awesome. So I don't think I'll have to spend too much time on these first few slides, convincing folks that it's important to have early intervention supports and early support, including supporting children who might be engaging in some challenging behavior. So these are just some of the many, many wonderful positive outcomes of intervening early to help, excuse me, to support children who might have developmental disabilities, who might have differences in, again, some of, their experience in their homes and things like that, or might be kind of, at risk for behavioral challenges or developmental needs. Not including, they're not limited to, but, reducing need for special education as intensively as needed because it's provided early and helping kind of get kids on track and just having positive results for children in general. So greater language abilities, better, outcomes in terms of cognitive abilities, and just improved wellness altogether, and less child abuse and neglect. And one of the reasons for that is, of course, early in childhood is when brain development is kind of at its most rapid and sensitive. And so it's really important to provide those supports very early while that's occurring. So there isn't that kind of cascade of challenges occurring that aren't being supported. And of course, every penny put into intervening early leads to really, a high rate of return. I'm not a business person, but if I were, this is the kind of business model you'd want to invest in. So supporting, families and children really early on, leads to, a lot of really positive benefits that then, of course, cascade over time in their childhood. So it's important. So a lot of educators, I believe, on the call. So thinking about those age groups of children who are either birth to 2 and that kind of part C, excuse me, or that part B kind of 3 to 5 age or early childhood special ed ages. Recommendations for early intervention around being routines-based and naturalistic settings, very family-centered, really empowering caregivers, those are, great principles to live by for IDEA, but also very important to think about when we're intervening on challenging behavior. The same kind of principles lie there. So there's a lot of reasons to address challenging behavior, not to have like a list of scary statistics, but excuse me, just one second. But children who are engaging in significant levels of challenging behavior can have more negative outcomes. That doesn't mean that these things will necessarily happen, but they're related to things like school failure, being suspended, expulsion, dropping out, future aggression or conduct disorder, and other negative life events. So it is really important to intervene early if children are experiencing challenges. All right, let's talk a little bit about proactive support. I love talking about this stuff because I feel like just a little bit of this can solve so many challenges. So if a young child is, if we want to build that really like strong universal, core for a child to experience. I'm so sorry. I have this tickle in my throat and it was not bad and now it's getting worse. I'm going to mute for a second and take a sip and take care of it.
Jessica, do you want? I can talk a little too. Certainly, if any of you were here for my first talk, I had a tickle in my throat as well, and it was not easy to give a talk. So yeah, and I'll just step in for a sec. And Dr. Simasek really does a lot of great work in this area, but I think we all know that all of us who are educators or parents, that the first step really is how proactive, how much can we prevent? You can't prevent everything. I remember that from teaching, but I remember there also was a lot just in terms of how you structure a classroom, or, how do you create schedules that are predictable and routines? How do you sort of create that behavioral momentum so it goes with the flow? Dr. Simasek, I didn't want to step in and steal your.
No, that was so helpful. It helped me work through that. I don't know what was going on, but it really did help me. Thank you
Yeah,
all.
I'm happy to step in whenever. Yes.
Yeah, if you see me mute and turn off my camera, just go ahead and take the reins for a second.
I am ready. I am ready. It will not be as good as what you can do, but I will try my best.
But a lot of these proactive strategies, again, I think they kind of become second nature when you work with young children a lot, but they really can get you pretty far. So I was really incorporating the preferences of a child is so important, right? It's motivating, it's engaging. So trying to really get to know every child and think about things that they like to do or topics they like to talk about, and trying to incorporate any learning that's going on into those kinds of preferences. And that power of choice is just so strong. Kids don't get a lot of choices throughout the day, right? And so making sure that whenever possible, giving children the power of choice can also go very, very far. That predictability of schedules, whether you have a picture schedule or there's so many cool apps these days with schedules on them, or even just talking a child through if they can verbally understand it. What's going to happen on kind of a macro level. So first we're going to eat breakfast and then we're going to wash our hands and then we're going to go to daycare. That on that level, but breaking down more complex tasks into kind of predictable steps can also be helpful. We're going to get out the bin of toys. We're going to play. And then when I hear your little brother wake up, we're going to clean up the toys together and put them back on the shelf. That can also help lead to that kind of predictability of what's going to be happening to keep children engaged. And when we're engaged, we're less likely to be engaged in challenging behavior. So kind of it's a great way to really fan the flames of engagement, so to speak. I like calling this inertia, but behavioral momentum, meaning like an object, right? An object in motion is more likely to stay in motion. A child who's engaged in something and doing it is more likely to continue to want to do those things. So if we have a harder task coming up, or there's a transition on its way that we know is going to be challenging, trying to get the child engaged in something else that is easier for them to do or more preferred, just going to make it more likely we can keep on rolling through whatever coming up might be challenging. Again, can get you a pretty, far way. So if I know we're going to have to get in the high chair or the car seat, and getting in that can sometimes be a struggle because the child doesn't want to get, strapped into those types of things. Engaging them in a fun little song or activity first as we're doing that transition can just help to make it more successful. We'll talk a little bit, actually most of the rest of the talk, about when maybe this is a great strategy but not quite enough. But it certainly can be a really good way to just kind of not get into a power struggle and help a child, kind of encourage them to engage in what it is that you want to do. And of course, that sets the stage for them to then be reinforced for making those choices. Oh, I noticed how great you're getting in your car seat. Now we get to go to the zoo faster because we're getting on our seatbelt faster. And so sometimes starting with those easier kinds of tasks can help lead to the harder types of things you need your child to be doing. So if brushing hair is challenging, first we're going to brush doll's hair, or you can brush a little bit of mom's hair, and now I'm going to do your hair, can kind of help, set the stage for that to happen. Transitions come up a lot when I'm helping folks who might be having, dealing with challenging behaviors. Anybody on here have challenges or had a parent report to them challenges with kind of transitioning either between places or between like from a preferred activity to something less preferred? Feel free to throw it in the chat if you have. It comes up all the time. Yes, yeah, it comes up all the time in, when I've been in schools and also when I've just been in children's homes with families. And so again, planning on the front end for things like transitions can really help so that you're not in the kind of heat of the moment. You're running late somewhere, the child doesn't want to go and they're dropping to the floor and fussing. And you're kind of in this reactive, like we just got to get out the door, stage. So the more we can plan in advance, we can do fun things like having a special object waiting for you. So if it's hard to transition from, home to daycare, Maybe there could be a fun, special toy that the child knows is there. We show them a picture that it's there, and that's kind of what we can focus on to get to daycare, or something that we bring along with us for that transition. I've worked with some kids where we'll put on like a fanny pack of some like kind of fun hand puppets and things that we can kind of take on our way with us when we go on longer transitions, like down a school hallway. Or kids, I have had joke books, like have been really a fun strategy too for kids who are verbal and think that kind of thing is funny. Having a little joke book that we can chat about while we're on our transition. And it's just kind of naturally happening. I'm not telling them, first, you need to walk 5 steps, and then I'm going to tell you a joke, because that sounds super boring and not fun, but that's just kind of a fun thing we're proactively planning for. And then helping to kind of distract away from things that might be, more upsetting, or whatever. So if we have to, the child's really into watching a YouTube video on the phone, we have to put the phone away. We can kind of soften the blow to that, so to speak, by having some other, somewhat preferred activity to transition to next. So these are all examples of just kind of proactive, quick, you could do it later today, things that you can do. And we would call that kind of intervening at the antecedent level, or proactively doing something, or kind of having arrangement of the environment to just encourage appropriate behavior. And when I've gone in to do things like functional behavior assessments, sometimes that truly is all is needed, right? We just need to do a little rearrangement. I've gone into schools and had someone be like, gosh, this kid keeps looking out the window, and they're just looking out the window, and, like all they want to do is look out the window. And we've talked about, like, not to oversimplify it, but could we move their desk so it's not facing out the window? And, sometimes just some of those types of solutions in and of themselves can be great. The child keeps getting into CDs in the TV console. Can we just put a baby gate up and be done with it? So there are times that intervening at that antecedent level is all that's needed. We don't need to pathologize a child and be like, well, we know they have autism, or we know they have a developmental need, so therefore we have to make a big deal about the fact that they're digging around in the entertainment center. So if it's something that could have kind of a simple solution like that, that's great. All kids have hard days. All kids engage in some levels of challenging behavior, and just being a kid. Now, the one caution with things like antecedent interventions, which are all the things I just talked through on the left-hand side of the screen, is that if it is a behavior that's a little bit more challenging, that we think we're going to have to do some kind of more planned intervention for, antecedent interventions wear off. Right? They're not going to last forever. If the kid is really motivated to get behind the entertainment center, a baby gate is only going to hold them for so long. And the same is said with a joke book. A joke book's a really cool, fun strategy. But if I'm doing that for 6 months straight and that's all I've got, it's probably not going to work indefinitely. I used to support a child who had engaged in some self-injurious behavior of biting their hands and their wrists. And somebody was like, oh, well, we should just make sure that they're carrying their binder in their books, and then they can't, bite their wrists as easily. And that did work for the first couple of days that it was tried, but eventually the child figured out, well, I just put the books down, and then I can engage in the self-injury. And so in that type of a situation, it's not that these are bad strategies. It's not like holding the books was a terrible idea, but it should be viewed more as a way to get your foot in the door, to teach a new skill, to reinforce that skill, as opposed to a standalone intervention by itself. So if that book holding, was combined with the child's earning something for, going 30 seconds without biting their wrist, and then 45 seconds the next day and 60 seconds, then it would have been a lot more effective, probably, because we were building off of it. But the way it was done, that was the only plan for the intervention, and it only worked for a couple of days. So keeping that in mind, proactive or antecedent kinds of strategies can be great, but they're not going to be a catch-all. So what we do want to think about is, what behaviors do we want to teach, or does the child already have, that we want to encourage them to use during these times? Most often, challenging behavior is happening for a reason. It's not a reason like the child is bad, or, they're traumatized. I mean, a child can be traumatized, but it's happening in that moment for a reason. There's something going on in the environment that behavior is serving a purpose for. And so if we can figure out some patterns around what that is, we can teach the child some alternative ways to get that same result that they're getting from the challenging behavior, which is probably happening subconsciously. Most children are not thinking, oh, I know, I'm going to drop to the floor and tantrum, and then I won't have to brush my teeth anymore. It's kind of just, it's the environment is shaping that behavior, just like all of our behavior, right? And so we're trying to kind of arrange the environment differently to teach different behaviors and encourage the child. This is it's much easier to just say no thanks, or, you know, can I hold the toothbrush myself, than to drop to the floor and have a 20-minute tantrum. So to do that, we want to think about, how is that child able to make choices? How can they request for things that they want to do? How can they ask for help? And one of the very first things I teach kids is how they can say no, or that they're all done. Because that's a really powerful thing to be able to communicate. Now I have a picture of some icons here. These can be done verbally, but they can also be done non-verbally. They can also be, I'm pointing at something, I'm tapping my mom's shoulder when I want her attention, I'm saying no or shaking my head when I don't want to try that new food. I'm asking for help when my game is pausing because the internet's buffering or whatever, buffering. So we want to identify what are some behaviors in that child's repertoire, or that we could easily teach them, that can help get the same result. Anyone familiar with probably the kind of functional behavior assessment process? We're not going to quite get there yet. We're going to talk a little bit more about things you can do prior to doing a full-scale functional behavior assessment. There are things like antecedent behavior consequence, or those fairly terms that you recognize. I will talk through them. Yeah, in classroom and in home, absolutely. All right. So at kind of the core, when we think about the environment going on, we think about what's happening before behavior. What is the behavior we're concerned about? Now, not all behavior is something we're concerned about. Behavior can also mean something somebody's doing that's positive. But in this case, what are we kind of concerned about happening? What's posing some kind of safety risk, impeding the child or the family's quality of life or stress levels? Those are the kinds of things we're looking at that might be something we need to support this child with. Once we determine that, we want to look at what types of things happen before this behavior. Sometimes the word trigger is used, but what kind of sets the stage for the behavior to happen? What situations does it happen in? And then also, what kinds of things follow the behavior happening, and what consequences? Those aren't necessarily planned consequences, just what kinds of things are happening in the environment after a behavior occurs. All right. So where we start in this, and this is also, you'll see if somebody does a functional behavior assessment, these are done in schools. They're also sometimes done by clinical providers. They're usually done, I have a section coming up, so I shouldn't, jump over that or jump to it right away, but they're usually done when behavior, again, is it's happening at a level that it's, there's some significant concern about we've tried a few things and they haven't really worked, and there's some significant concerns about that behavior. That's when they'd be done. It's a more formal process. But at the base of it is kind of just the principles of behavior that can be also looked at even if you're not launching a full-scale functional behavior assessment. So what's happening before a behavior? What is the behavior itself that we're worried about? And then what is the consequence that's following it? So a good place to start is that behavior. What is it that is happening? And so the first thing we want to do if a child is engaging in a behavior is to define that behavior. So we can understand behavior best when we start with defining what we mean by that. So on the left side here are ways I've often had behavior described to me. Some of these might ring a bell to some of you. So-and-so is having a hard day. She's melting down. There's a power struggle during snack time. There's a big ordeal, it's really hard. So people will describe kind of a lot of the impact of the behavior when they're talking about the behavior. And that's certainly valid. But to understand what exactly we mean so that we're all on the same page, we have to ask clarifying questions if we're the person supporting that child or that family or that education team. We have to try to figure out, what does having a hard day look like? Because my definition of having a child having a hard day might be very different than Dr. Hollandy's definition, or by the home visitor's definition, or by the parent's definition. So we all need to get on the same page about what does it look like? What exactly is happening so that we understand what the behavior of concern is. So that is often what I will ask as a follow-up clarifying question. What does it look like when she's having a hard day? What kinds of things is she doing? Is she hitting? Is she kicking? If you got to kind of give them some ideas about what, that's what I'm starting to envision if someone's saying someone's having a really hard day behaviorally. And then they can clarify, oh no, she doesn't do that. It's this, or yeah, it's like this. Around how long does it last? And then that prioritization. I was just a few weeks ago reviewing some functional behavior assessment data, and a team who was trying really hard. They were trying to do all the right things. They had like 6 observations, which when we get to it in a little bit is good. It's good to have a lot of observational data and interview data. But there was just a laundry list of the behaviors that they were looking at with this child. And some of them were concerning, like elopement, right? That's a concerning behavior. There's a big safety challenge there. But some of them were maybe like not so concerning for a young preschool type age child, right? Maybe they weren't great, maybe like laying down on the floor sometimes, but they weren't a high priority at that point. If a child's eloping or being aggressive or engaging in self-injury, those are the behaviors that I think most people are going to want to target first. And some of the other stuff about, oh, they're not getting starting on their assignment soon enough, that's something we can worry about later, and maybe not even rise to the level of needing a full-scale FBA to do that. And so this is also a good time to kind of talk through so that everyone supporting that child can kind of be on the same page of what is it that we're talking about if a child is having a hard time or they're engaging in some challenging behavior. So here's an example. Sometimes we'll call this doing an operational definition. That term doesn't really matter, but what does matter is the process of doing it. So if I'm supporting a family and they say, this child's engaging in high levels of aggression, that's not even defined enough yet. I want to understand, what does aggression look like? What are you concerned about that this child is doing? So that we're all on the same page about what it means. So we'll together, I'm not the expert on the child. The person who knows the child best, usually their caregiver or their educator, is the expert. And so we'll work together to kind of define, what does it look like? So in this example, aggression would look like anytime that there's an attempt to kind of make contact with a caregiver, the child's making contact with a caregiver or a sibling with enough force that would kind of cause an audible sound or cause discomfort. And then I'm going to give some examples of ways we've seen aggression happen before with this child. So the child might hit, kick, bite, or kind of act like they're going to bite by leaning in towards someone's arm with an open mouth. And then we're also going to do non-examples. What does not count as aggression? Now, this is very individualized. This is not necessarily the right way to define aggression. This is for this child in their situation, how much they were engaging in aggression, and what is of most concern and importance to the family. So in this example, even though it's not a good thing to go around saying, I'm going to hit mommy, we are not counting. I mean, we might be counting, but in terms of if aggression happened or not, we're not right now worried about making verbal threats. Now, I'm not going to convince you that's the right choice or the wrong choice, but it's to help prioritize what are we focused on so that we can track progress and say, is aggression getting better? Yes or no? Is this happening more or less or the same? And if we're all defining it differently, you can obviously see the problem in that. I'm saying, yeah, it is getting better. There was only 2 instances of it this past week. And then Dr. Hollandy's saying, what are you talking about? It happened 15 times. And if we're just defining it differently, we're not actually measuring if it's improving. And therefore, we don't know if what we're doing to try to improve it is working or not. And then once we've defined it, we also have to think about, how do we measure it? Measure sounds like a really technical term, but it simply means we need to be tracking to see if this is what's happening, if it's getting better or worse, to know if we need to try to change more things around or not. And so some ways you can decide, how do we want to measure aggression? Is it happening a lot or a little bit? Is it happening 50 times a day or 1 time every month? 1 time a month is surely still too much. That's not a problem, but it helps us decide, would it be too hard to try to write down, ask a parent, hey, jot down every single time your child is hitting if it's happening 50 times a day, as opposed to having them think back, did it happen this week, yes or no? And then we can also look at, is the behavior more discrete, meaning it kind of starts and stops, like a hit or a kick or a bite? Or is it like kind of longer duration and more episodic, meaning kind of once it gets started, it's going. So if this is Johnny and Johnny starts hitting, maybe it's kind of an episode where the hitting is happening and the kicking is happening and there's biting happening and it all lasts for about 10-ish minutes. Then we might not really be as concerned with tracking every single hit within that episode, but more, let's time how long these things happen for. So more looking at like the duration of it. Again, none of these are necessarily right or wrong. We're trying to look at how can we understand what it is we're targeting, and then we can measure, is it getting better? Is it staying the same, or is it getting worse? And that will help us know what to do. All right. So let's say we've defined our behavior. We know we're working on aggression. Then we want to look at what kinds of antecedents, kind of like we were talking about on one of the first slides, are happening. What kinds of things are going on in the environment that kind of might set the stage for aggression to happen. It doesn't mean it necessarily causes aggression, but it's more likely to happen in these scenarios. Transitions, difficult demands, like self-care tasks, parents maybe being their attention being divided. They have to take a phone call, they have to take care of the baby sibling, and that's when we see it. Those are the kinds of things going on in the environment that we want to identify. So understanding antecedents that can influence behaviors, we have to kind of, again, go through that process of understanding what is happening. So we're doing some interviews, or if we're just there working with a family, we're kind of observing these things, or if we're working with an education system, we're observing these things in the school environment. What other things are going on when that targeting behavior is happening? When is it more likely to occur? With whom? Not in a blaming, all of this is in a non-judgmental way, but what are the patterns surrounding it? Because once we can identify those patterns, that's going to give us our clues for how we can intervene to improve it. The other thing is we really want to know, when is it not happening? What times are going great for this child? That is also really important information, because we are going to try to take the elements of the times that are going really well and weave those into the times we want to intervene on. We want to know what they like to do. We want to know, when is it likely that they're going to be just fine and you're not going to be seeing aggression happening? How are they currently communicating? How do you know what it is that they want, what they don't want? If they need help with something, if they're feeling some kind of discomfort, if they want your attention or a cuddle or something like that. So the benefits to identifying antecedents is we can then start to understand those patterns that are surrounding the behavior, and we can easily change them. Like you saw in the earlier slide, we can do things to modify those antecedents to help set the stage from our appropriate behavior to happen, teach that appropriate behavior if we need to, and then reinforce it for happening. The other benefit is, I have young children, and one of my children has autism, so I know this firsthand too. Sometimes just having that like outside objective view from somebody can be so helpful, right? Because when you're in it, especially if there might be a tantrum going on or there's a challenging behavior happening, it's stressful, it feels like it's lasting an hour, even if it's only 10 minutes. So sometimes having somebody walk through all of this with you, even if you already know, I know what an ABC is, I know what an antecedent is, but to have that objective view can be really, really beneficial and help you uncover patterns you weren't even aware were there. I will give you one more example on that. So my son, who does have autism, it's much better, thank goodness, but used to really have a hard time sleeping at night. And it wasn't staying asleep, it was going to sleep. And it would be like an ordeal of like 60, minutes, 90 minutes. So you don't even know how long, because you just start to nod off trying to get him to sleep. He would have all his energy. He'd be kind of, scripting or talking to himself a little bit. And it would be pitch black and he would just like not seem tired at all. And And we actually participated in this little study. And one of the things for the study was you're supposed to watch these videos that had literal like cartoon animals in them, right? So you're supposed to watch these videos on antecedents, behaviors, and consequences. Now, these are things I know well. I've taught classes on them. I've trained on them. I've, done clinical work. But by just, in some desperate night when you wouldn't go to sleep, reviewing that, it's talking about, oh, well, if what are you what's happening when the not going to sleep behavior is happening, or the being awake behavior. And it dawned on me, well, lots of times it feels like has a lot of energy, so I'll go in and kind of like pat his back, or soothingly talk to him to see if it'll help calm him down. And I'm totally probably providing some reinforcement for him to act that way. I hadn't thought about it like that. I know how behavior works. But because you're in it and it's happening and you're part of that situation, it can be hard to have kind of that bird's eye view to what's going on. And so helping a family uncover something like this, even if I'm not doing a full scale functional behavior assessment formally, these are some of the initial questions. If I have someone pick up the phone and call me or email me and Dr. Hollandy saying, my niece, my granddaughter, my child is engaging in challenging behavior and I don't know what to do. Those are some of my first questions. What does it look like? What's happening at times that it's happening? When can you predict it would be likely to happen? When can you predict it would not be likely to happen, etc. Okay, so let's do some practice here. And I'm also keeping an eye on the time. These 3 bullets, I've probably heard about 100 times in every time I've gotten into consult on behavior in my entire life. And this is not teasing anybody. You heard my example I just shared moments ago. If somebody asked me, why doesn't your child sleep at night? I'd be like, I don't know. He's got a bunch of energy. I'm not sure why. So when you're in it, it's hard to see it. So let's practice. Let's say you're supporting a family and their child is engaging in some challenging behavior and you're trying to ask some follow-up questions. And this is how they're responding. I don't know what happens randomly. There's no way to predict it. Happens all the time. There's nothing we can do to change it. Or we don't see that behavior here, or we don't see it with this person, or we don't see it at school, etc. So if everyone could just think on that for a second. Yes, Ben, you're so true. It's so much easier to parent other people's kids. I'm like, whatever that saying is, like how if you make shoes, your children don't have new shoes, like that. That's me. So everyone think about these. If you are supporting a family in that situation, what kinds of clarifying questions would you, because they're kind of dead ends, right? Okay, we're trying to figure out patterns around this behavior and someone just says that it happens randomly. There's literally no way to predict it at all. What types of questions would you maybe ask, or combine it with some observations or whatever, to try to help get on the path of getting some answers to potential things going on in the environment when the behavior is happening? I'll just wait a minute. I'll think of some on my own too. Feel free to just type them in chat. Or if you don't want to share with the full group, feel free to send them just to me or to Jen or to Drake, and we can read them out loud. If you've done any kind of behavioral supporting of young children and you've tried to ask questions about it, I guarantee you one of these 3 responses will come up at some point. And they're not necessarily wrong. It's just how it feels probably to people. What could you ask, or what could you do if this is how someone's responding when you're trying to figure out patterns? Believe me, I have this conversation probably every week. Okay, Kim, that's a great one. Tell me about the last time, think about the last situation that happened, or the last time the behavior happened. Tell me about that. That is an excellent one. And I actually had not thought of that one, like in how I've approached this before. I don't think I've ever asked anybody that. And that is an excellent way to approach it, because it gets them to start to be specific. Maybe the last time isn't doesn't the pattern every single time, but surely there's some information in there that we can, kind of take. When do you see this happen the most? Yep. And when do you not see it? Or when does the child do well? That's definitely one too, Jen, that I will do a lot of. If we're really kind of just hitting a dead end on talking about the challenging behavior, I'll usually kind of switch gears and start talking about what times go well. What does your child like to do? when, you know, what are they doing when you're doing computer games or playing princesses or whatever it is that they like, so that we can kind of start to, okay, maybe it does happen a lot, maybe it is sort of random, but at least we know it's not really happening that much during snack time or pretend playtime. Those are great. Thank you for sharing those. Yeah. So kind of thinking about when's the last time it happened? When is it not happening? Yeah, has it happened with particular people more or less? That's a great one too, Ben, because, you know, and I always am really clear about that. It's not in a judgmental kind of way. It's in maybe there's different things going on. You know, maybe it's more likely that dad's doing drop off in the morning and that's when it's happening. And it can help us start to uncover that piece of information. And how long does it last, or what makes it stop? Those are great. Those are awesome. The what makes it stop one too in particular is really, really good, because again, it's giving us information about things in the environment that might be related to that behavior occurring. Those are excellent. Excellent. And it's always the dad's a drop off, right? They've got the hard job. Pickup's easy because kids want to come with you. Drop off is a little harder. Okay. So let's see. So that's kind of talking about antecedents, but the same goes through for consequences. Now, consequences are a little bit harder because, again, I think we think of the word consequence and we think, oh, there's a consequence, you're on timeout or something like that. And this literally just means what happens after. So Kim's last point about what makes it stop, that would be an excellent question to ask, to think about things like consequences. These could be a little harder. Like I gave my example with my own son. If you ask me, what are you doing when he doesn't go to sleep? I'd be like, well, I'm not like letting him get out of bed and giving him an ice cream cone, right? Like I know enough not to do that. But I wouldn't probably have put together, oh yeah, sometimes I do go in and kind of like pat his back and like, you know, try to get him to like quiet down a little bit and settle in. You're not thinking about it like that, right? Like I'm just being a mom trying to get my kid to settle down so he can go to sleep so I can go to sleep too. But it might be functioning to maintain that behavior, even though that's of course not my intention. In fact, I'm trying to do the opposite. I'm trying to get him to settle down. And so these can be a little bit harder to uncover, but are sadly also probably the most important piece, right? So consequences really maintain behavior for people and all beings, right? So things that happen in the environment, we do things for a reason, and we stop doing things for a reason, right? We do certain behaviors, we don't do other behaviors, and we often do them. There's a lot, I'm not trying to oversimplify. There's a lot of other reasons behaviors occur, and there's a lot of context that goes into things. But when the rubber meets the road, like I'm engaging, I'm you know, doing something that's going to work. If I'm going to use a vending machine and it's not working, pretty soon I'm going to stop putting money into it, right? Because it's just not giving the outcome that I'm looking for. And so consequences are very influential on behavior. And understanding what happens immediately after a behavior occurs, or like Kim's point, I think, Kim, I'm just going to like add that when I give this to future talks of what happens to stop the behavior, is really important to know, because it is likely maintaining or influencing that behavior while it's occurring. Yeah, what were they trying to avoid? That's a great one too, right? Like, what is it that they're not wanting to do? What is it that we would be doing right now if we weren't, you know, laying on the floor or kicking our feet or whatever? So oftentimes this is not the plan. There might not be a consequence at all that's like planned. Like, again, you're on timeout is the one that comes to mind, although of course that's not something we would ever recommend. But that's not often what's actually following a behavior, right? There's usually some redirection happening. There's, you know, mom patting you back on your back and shushing you. There's, like to Kim's point, some task that's supposed to be getting done that's not being done because we're dealing with the behavior happening, or there might be other things like this delay or preventing of an activity occurring, some kind of attention happening. Again, not attention like good job, but attention nonetheless, of hey, we got to get up, we got to go to class, you know, whatever. So benefits to really understanding consequences, or just, I guess this is also not just a benefit, but like having observational data can be really helpful. And again, I say that it makes it sound like you're doing some big formal process. Just observing with your own eyes and noting kind of, okay, the behavior's happening, what's happening, you know, right after, or what's stopping it. And doing so in a very, that is going to help you understand more than interviewing a parent. You can certainly interview a parent, but like, if you're just saying, well, what do you do after the behavior? They might not be able to actually tell you exactly. It might be easier to observe it. The same child I was telling you about before, who used to do a lot of wrist biting, would also sometimes bite to the people who are supporting him. And it was me. And this is a great, back to, I think it was Ben's point about who's with the child at the time. I supported this child in one type of classroom setting, and a different paraprofessional type person supported them in a different setting. I'm changing details here, but that's the premise of it. And the other person kept reporting that she was getting bit, that the child was biting her. And I was like, it hasn't happened. Like, I haven't, you know, the child hasn't bit me before. And one day we were kind of transitioning who was with the child at that time. And while we were doing that, the child was over by me, and she came into the room, and he like raced over to the other side of the room to try to bite her, which was so surprising because I was just right there, you know, with my arm was right there. He could have easily bit me. And she didn't say anything. She didn't do anything differently than me, except, understandably, because I'm sure it hurt, she gave him this like very intense look. She was like, and just like, you know, staring him right in the eyes, like, oh my gosh, like she didn't say it out loud, but like, you know, the look said it all. And it was kind of dramatic. And again, I'm sure it did hurt. That was the only difference we could figure out between the two of us of reacting to the biting, or the attempting to bite. I think the child had attempted to bite me like once or twice, but, and that was enough that maintained that behavior, that reaction seemed to be maybe not the only thing, but it certainly maintained some of that behavior. And that's why it was happening differently with that child. Okay. Thanks, Drake. Okay. I'll speed up. I'm going to go past a couple of these really quick because we got a quick little,
It's okay, Jessica, too. I mean, we can kind of talk through.
Yeah, I just wanted to get to this quick example, if that's okay. Is that all right, Jen?
Sure, you're fine. Yeah, we're flexible. It's fine.
Okay. Where this was, we had about 6 slides in between there, but we kind of just talked through all of them. So here's one example to think about together really quick. So this is a child named Devin who's 4 years old and is engaging in some kind of challenging, or sometimes we use the term interfering behavior, and kicking and biting. And it's observed that this happens when the child's playing he's playing, and his younger sister Ashley comes over and is trying to like play with the things that he likes to do, like his trains and stuff like that. So this is happening quite a bit, of course, stressing the parents out because this is a young child and the younger sibling's even younger, and we don't want them to get hurt. And so if we were going through a full scale FBA, but even if we weren't, a functional behavior assessment, even if we weren't doing that, some of the elements we could do with those antecedents and consequences is, of course, define that behavior. What does it look like when he's doing this, right? It's sort of defined here, kicking and biting, but you know, exactly what does that look like? What doesn't count? And then we look at potential antecedents, potential consequences that are happening, and we do observations and we'd observe and see, well, gosh, Devin's playing with his trains. Ashley comes over to grab the trains. He kicks her, acts like he's going to bite her, and the parent comes and gets Ashley and brings her away. So now he's got the trains. Ashley's not taking them. And that's happening over time, not because the parent's being a bad parent. They're trying to protect their younger child. And then they are not a bad parent. And Devin's just learning, oh, if I kind of shove or kick or pretend to bite, this little being who's in here messing up my trains is going to be escorted away from me. And they also notice this sequence of events is more likely, Devin's fuse is a little bit shorter if they know that he's tired. I'm going to skip through this really quick. So if we go to that example and we apply that, okay, now we've understood this is happening during antecedents, like his really preferred toys like trains. And then it's followed by kind of that the child, the sibling being removed, or that, the parent taking the sibling away so that he can have all the trains to himself. That's kind of the scenario. We've identified all of that. We'd identify an alternative behavior. Maybe in this case, Devin doesn't really talk, or it would just be easier for him to quickly tap his parent to indicate that he doesn't want Ashley to play with those toys. Now, everyone might say, well, what? He has to learn to share. Absolutely, he has to learn to share. But first, he has to learn not to kick and bite, his 2-year-old sister or whatever. So our first priority is going to be to decrease that kicking and biting. And then I promise we will get to more appropriate sharing. But right now he's not sharing anyways. He's just not sharing in a much less appropriate way. So first, we're going to have Devin tap parent. Parent swoops into the rescue, gets Ashley, gives her something fun to do somewhere else. And he has his trains to himself. We're monitoring the data to see, not by data, I just mean, is he kicking and biting that day? Yes or no? As that is decreasing to 0 and staying around 0, then we can talk about building on more skills. And this might be a very fast process. This might be like 2 days. I know I'm making it sound like this very long, drawn out thing, but this might be, we do this for a couple of days. We also are going to implement an antecedent intervention, meaning we know this is most likely to happen with the Thomas the Train toys. We know that that is when it's going to happen. He doesn't mind so much if Ashley comes over and he's playing with blocks or he's looking at books. So we're going to teach Devin how to tap the parent, really simple thing to do, with books and blocks first, because we're setting the stage to make it more likely he's going to be successful with the blocks and the books. And we're going to just try to minimize having the trains out while we're doing all this stuff so that we can make him successful. So he's learning to tap. He's learning to kind of tolerate Ashley being over there in the meantime with something that isn't as big of a deal to him. If the parent, there's communication, amongst parents or amongst people supporting this child, if they know he skipped a nap, they're going to go ahead and position themselves kind of between Devin and Ashley on those days, because we know Devin might be a little bit more sensitive about the sharing on those days. So that's our kind of packaged intervention, right? Let's say this is successful. And let's say he's doing this. He do this for a few days and it's successful. Then we can start teaching, we can start incorporating, doing it with the trains. As that's successful, then we can start to incorporate him doing a little, hey, it's my turn, or, some way to do some back and forth sharing with Ashley. And that's kind of the process that you'd follow to get from point A, there's challenging behavior happening and we don't know what to do, all the way to point Z, which is we decrease the challenging behavior, we increased his tolerance, we built on the behavior so that we were teaching him more things. It wasn't just tap your parent and they're always going to take your younger sibling away. That's just where we had to start.